Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. And you have joined us for our ACC preview with Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland. Ryan covers Clemson football in particular, but the ACC and the nation as well. All right, Ryan, of course, it's the conference in college football that seems to be the most locked down, odds-on favorite. It just doesn't seem any way in which Clemson's not going to win this thing, but there's certainly intrigue in the Coastal Division where we could possibly have a seventh champion emerge from the Coastal Division in 7 different years. But we'll start in the Atlantic, and any thoughts you have starting at the top.
Yeah, I do think Clemson will win their 5th Atlantic Division and likely their 5th ACC championship in a row. I don't think that's too surprising. They return a ton of talent on offense. They lose a ton of talent on the defensive line, but their secondary and even their linebackers should be strong. Again, they had the #1 defense last year, and they have a very weak draw from the Coastal Division, as if they needed that. But they get the 2 worst teams in UNC and Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's almost like if you're looking for some possible way for Clemson not to win the Atlantic Division, of course, the 2 possible losses there, possible in quotes, would be within the division against Syracuse on the road. Of course, the Orange have played Clemson better than anyone in the country the past 2 years, or of course, because of the talent possibilities, the game against Florida State, but I believe that's at home this year. And then those teams would have to go out and be basically perfect against everyone else, or basically lose 1 game, and they would have the tiebreaker over Clemson. So that's the only feasible way in which a Florida State or Syracuse would be the most likely candidates to somehow pull off the major upset of the decade and win a division in which Clemson looks like they have it locked down. As you look down the rest of the division, what do we see?
Yeah, so at number 2, I have Syracuse. They finished 2nd in the division last year, ended with 10-3 record. Hadn't had a 10-win season in quite a while. They lose Eric Dungey, and they lose a lot of their offensive line. And Dungey's a real game changer at quarterback. So I think that kind of causes some initial concern. But as you look into it more, folks up there are really excited about quarterback Tommy DeVito, and I think there's good reason for it. He came into that Florida State game when Eric Dungey got hurt, and he led them to a victory, played very well. Again, a few weeks later, they needed help against UNC. They had blown a big lead. Tommy DeVito came in and led them to an overtime victory in that one. So there's a little bit of a track record there. They're going to have to change their offense because DeVito's more of a pocket passer. Eric Dungey was actually their leading rusher on top of being their starting quarterback. So it'll be different, but I think it can work. Their schedule's pretty favorable. They get Pittsburgh and Duke from the Coastal, which – I know that that's a big pet peeve of yours, but it is a factor. And, whether you play Virginia versus Duke is a big deal. And so that benefits them. And if you kind of zoom out of the ACC in their schedule in the non-conference, they also swapped Notre Dame from Maryland. So another 10-win season is in the cards. Obviously, there's some questions on offense. They averaged over 40 points a game last year. And I don't know if they can quite do that, so they just have to minimize the drop-off. If it's a small drop-off, I think 9-10 wins, 2nd place in the division is feasible. And they get Clemson in Syracuse. They get them early in the year. They're good enough that 1 fluke win, and you control your own destiny. So that's, I think, the de facto Atlantic Division title game. And frankly, 1 game could go either way in college football. So I think they have a shot. And if they beat Clemson, I think you're picking them to win the ACC. So I think that's kind of the number 2 pick to win the conference.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the Syracuse story in 2018. They were the one kind of outsider to break into the top 15 with the 10-win season, the bowl victory, and of course a wire-to-wire game against Clemson. It's difficult not to like Dino Babers, so I think what he has established there is for real. I don't know if it's to the extent of 10-3 real, but against that schedule, again, maybe it's possible that, again, they are with Florida State in particular down in NC State, probably not as good as they've been the past few years, that they, again, are most likely the 2nd best team in the division, if not the conference. And again, a couple light touches out of conference or out of division. And then you mentioned the Maryland game where they were trounced by Notre Dame last year. As we continue down, I'm going to be intrigued by the selection of NC State versus Florida State possibly here.
Yeah, so I'm picking Florida State at number 3. But I think that's a very volatile pick. They could definitely finish second. They could definitely finish towards the bottom of the Atlantic Division. A big strike against them is their Coastal Division opponents to get Miami and Virginia. And we got to the Coastal Division. I think we'll talk about how high we are in both of those. But I think their consensus top three, certainly top half of that division. So that's a tough draw for them. They also go to Clemson. But I like what they could do on offense. They're going to get healthy on the offensive line. They bring back Cam Akers, who struggled a lot last year behind a really porous offensive line, but was very good as a freshman. Was a 5-star recruit. So I think you look for Cam Akers to bounce back. They've got a really strong wide receiver core, and they move on from DeAndre Francois, who left the team, was going to go to FAU. I'm not sure. I think he's going FCS at this point. But James Blackman returns. I think he was able to redshirt last year. I think folks are excited about him. He's had 2 years of development time now. They also brought in Alex Hornibrook from Wisconsin. So I think regardless of how that plays out, you should have better quarterback play, barring freak injuries happening to him again at the offensive line. That should get better. You still have Cam Akers and great wide receivers. And they bring back a lot of talent on defense. I don't think they're ready to win 11 games, but 8 or 9 seems very feasible.
I'm kind of surprised when I look at Florida State that I'm not wowed by any particular position group. Even usually 7 and 8 win teams across college football in the Power Five have really strong units, and then obviously deficiencies that weigh them down. And when I look at Florida State, maybe the secondary is really good. And we've broken down a ton of Florida State here, so people dive into the videos if you enjoy the Florida State football analysis. But we've looked at every position, and yeah, this is not vintage Florida State by any stretch, but can they be 5-7 again? No, there's just way too much talent. I got to imagine that they can squeak out 2 to 3 more wins and lock up a decent bowl bid. What's really good about this division, and we've talked about it, Ryan, is that Syracuse no longer is a doormat. Neither is Wake Forest. So the division doesn't have that second elite team or really good team to really challenge Clemson. But man, from top to bottom, this is a really strong division, and there are no easy outs.
Well, that depends on what you think of Louisville. So I'll run down.
Oh, okay. I'm forgetting about Louisville and their crash and burn last season. Yes, that should continue because I usually count them among of course, the NC States and Florida States.
And to your point, that's sort of what's helped Syracuse is not only is Florida State down, but Louisville's down. So it creates a vacuum that they're able to fill. So after Florida State, I think you're looking at NC State and Wake Forest. I love what Wake Forest can do on offense. Both Jamie Newman and Sam Hartman, we've talked about them as being some of the better quarterbacks. Only one of them can start, but they're both strong quarterbacks. So Wake Forest should enjoy good quarterback play, and they'll need it as they have to replace their star wide receiver, Greg Dortch. But their defense is weak, and so that kind of leads me to pick NC State for that'd be 4th in the division. So NC State's losing Ryan Finley, which is going to be tough. But they've out-recruited Wake Forest for so long. Now they've lost to him 2 years in a row, so I don't know how much that means. But I think NC State and Wake Forest are kind of a toss-up in those next 2 spots.
NC State most likely has missed that window of opportunity against Clemson. Of course, they missed the kick in overtime that would have toppled or near the end of the game that forced the overtime in 2016 that led to Clemson's first national championship. And then they were supposed to be a challenger to the throne the next few years, and Clemson just really manhandled them face-to-face. And now NC State, I expect them to take a bit of a step back. And certainly they weren't up to the challenge against Texas A&M in a 39-point bowl rout as we look at the rest of the division. So who would be up next?
Yeah, so to your point, I do think NC State really missed their window. Although somewhat in their defense, their best wins over the past few years, they've had easy schedules where they've taken care of business. But they got a lot of hype for beating a Florida State team that ended up being no good. They got a lot of hype for beating Louisville back when they had Lamar Jackson. But that Louisville team went 8-4. They don't really have any great wins, so I think they got a little overhyped, and then they lost the key games to Notre Dame and Clemson, and it seemed like they collapsed. But actually, they just beat okay teams. So I don't know if that's a defense or indictment of them. But anyway, so after Wake Forest, I have Boston College. They get Virginia Tech in their cross. That's their rival, and they go to Pittsburgh. They bring back Anthony Brown, and they bring back one of the best running backs in the ACC, and A.J. Dillon. But they lose a lot on defense and the offensive line. So they're really built on ground and pound, so they need that offensive line. Talked to some of the folks over at BC Interruption, the SB Nation site for Boston College. They seem pretty confident about their offensive line, but I think they've also kind of resigned themselves to the fact that this is a 7-5 type team year in, year out. I don't think this year's any different. Even if the offense improves some, I think the defense regresses to make up for it. And they're not bad at all. To your point, they're very solid. They challenged Clemson more than anyone in the ACC except for Syracuse last year. But I think they kind of slot into that 7-5 type team again.
Yeah, when you say 7-5 again, death, taxes, BC winning 7 games, that seems to be it. Steve Adazio had the one iteration at 3-9, but other than that, it's been 7-6, 7-6, 7-6. And then the year that they've got the opportunity to win the 8th, they get the bowl game canceled by weather, so they finish 7-5. So it's got 7 wins for Steve Adazio every year, except one at BC. They've transitioned much better offensively with the emergence of A.J. Dillon, of course, and they actually have a semblance of a passing attack that they didn't have 3 to 4 years ago. Unfortunately for them, they had a top-rated defense 3 or 4 years ago. There was a stretch of time there for about 3 years where BC had arguably one of the best defenses in the country, statistically and in reality. They've taken steps back, and to your point, I believe that they will take another step or two back and be just maybe a top 40 or 50 defense this year, despite their offensive progress that they've made, and it'll probably add up to 7-5 once again. And to round things out with a couple teams left here.
Yeah, so Louisville, I think you picked to finish 7th. I don't think there's a ton of analysis there. I'll just say I think the Scott Satterfield hire from App State is a really strong one. It's really what we expected UNC to make. So when Louisville got it, seemed like a steal. I think it was a steal. But for UNC, it seems like it worked out. Mac Brown's really got some positive momentum there as well.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I got Ryan Cantor on the line, shaking the Southland. Please join him for the Clemson football coverage. Of course, I want to let you know that we've got a donation set up for a young man named Sam, hashtag Sam Strong. You'll see the description section below the hashtag and the link right there. If you love to bet football games, please join us right there. Use the promo code MRTVCFB, and you get an additional 50% added to your account balance if you use the link in the promo code MRTVCFB. Now things get interesting, Ryan, as we move on to the ACC Coastal Division. 6 years, 6 champions, and Virginia seems to be a chic pick to make it 7 for 7.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed because I thought I was being on the cutting edge here picking them. I had this plan months ago, and then the ACC media comes out and actually picks them over Virginia Tech and Miami. But I'm still sticking with my pick. They have the best quarterback in the division, the second best quarterback in the ACC behind just Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Perkins, who not only is a good passer, but he can rack up. He's a threat to go for 1,000 rushing yards. So I think that gives them a big advantage. They're going to have some challenges, though, as they have some big replacements to make on offense. They lose Olamide Zacchaeus, who's their star wide receiver, and Jordan Ellis, who's their star running back. So they're going to need to lean on Bryce Perkins pretty heavily. But he has some, aside from the top wide receiver, the next 2 wide receivers are seniors, and they come back. Perkins had over 2,600 passing yards and over 900 rushing yards last season. So he's a transfer who came from Arizona State by way of a JUCO. So this is really only his second year as a starter for Virginia. Hasn't had years and years of time in that offense. So if he could take a step forward, he could help make up for some of the losses on offense. And then their defense is strong, bringing a lot of guys back. They go to Virginia Tech, which is tough because they've lost 19 out of 20. So that's where this pick gets tough, but I'm sticking with my guns, and I'm going to continue to pick Virginia.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out whether this is fool's gold. I'm going to spend my next 3 weeks doing that because, like you, I was thinking most of the offseason, yeah, this is a team that I just think Bronco Mendenhall has done an exceptional job. He won 65-70% of his games at BYU, and they haven't been the same since he left there. Now he comes to Virginia, and basically he was implementing his system when they went 2-10. He wasn't worried about winning football games. And then it's 6 wins, then it's 8. But I think we might be putting a little bit too much stock in that feel good 28-0 bowl win and being like, okay, wow, Virginia is ready to emerge. They did, as you mentioned, they lost Zacchaeus, who was an all ACC wide receiver. He caught 93 passes last year. They lose their 1,000-yard running back, and they weren't that explosive to begin with. So I think that they might have issues generating quick offense, but the defense is really good. So I'm going to be racking my brain between Miami, Virginia, and Virginia Tech as we get to your second place team.
Yeah. So first, let me correct myself. Virginia gets Virginia Tech at home. They go to Miami. So Miami gets them both of those contenders at home, which kind of makes you want to pick Miami. But I'm actually picking Virginia 1, and then even still Virginia Tech number 2. They have Ryan Willis this year at quarterback. As Josh Jackson, who was hurt last year, is now transferred to Maryland. They bring back 11 on defense. Their defense was terrible last year, the worst they've had in a really long time. I think that'll balance out to the type of Virginia Tech defense that we're used to seeing. The offense isn't going to be great. They missed out on that Tavian Feaster transfer. Clemson's backup running back, who's pretty explosive and could have made a big difference for them, ended up choosing South Carolina. That's a tough break for them. He really would have helped them as their rushing attacks struggled for years. But I think their defense takes a big step forward, and I think that's the difference in them finishing towards the top of the division.
Yeah, Virginia Tech, Justin Fuente arrived on the scene. I thought he was the right hire. He takes them to the conference championship game and plays within a score of Clemson in that first season, has another 9-4 after that, and they were relatively strong, finished in the top 25. And then the downer last year that many people could have seen coming because of the real, just serious youth on that team, a lot of injuries. Bud Foster fielded his worst defense ever by far, according to any measurement. So they look to come back into play, and Ryan Willis may have turned out to be a better quarterback than Josh Jackson. So that could be a blessing in disguise. And I think it's an interesting team that could have a bounce back. But now we get to the team that, based on recruiting rankings, should win the division. Yeah.
So number 3, as you're implying, yes, I've got Miami 3rd. But kind of like Florida State, I think they're kind of a volatile pick as well. I don't think it would surprise anyone if they won the division, but at the same time, if they really struggled, I don't think that'd be a huge surprise either. I was expecting Tate Martell, who's the transfer from Ohio State, to really take them up and really help them bounce back. But reports from camp that I've heard are that N'Kosi Perry has a shot to start. And maybe he's improved a lot, but from what I've seen, he was not impressive last year. And again, maybe he's improved, but it's hard to tell if that's more of a negative commentary on Tate Martell versus positive spin for N'Kosi Perry. So I think the quarterback situation there is cause for concern, and Ryan Willis being the difference in Virginia Tech is why I'm taking Virginia Tech over them. Miami does benefit from getting both Virginia and Virginia Tech at home. But they get Florida State on the road as their cross, which is a pretty tough cross. Well, potentially a very tough cross. Hard to say, really. But their defense is going to be good. They bring back 3 starters at linebacker. They've had some of the best linebackers in the ACC for years. But that offense was only ranked 66th, the 66th scoring offense last year. They only returned 4 guys. They have huge question marks at quarterback. And they have a new coach, Manny Diaz, so I'm not sure how much you trust him with an offense. He's, first-time head coach after going to Temple for a week or so.
Yeah, and if you dig into the advanced metrics, I don't know that there was a team in college football that had such a discrepancy between offensive lack of production and defensive prowess as Miami, that still finished in the top 20 in scoring defense, despite the offensive lack of production. That was bottom 5 to 20 in most of the advanced metrics in the passing game because the quarterback situation was that bad last year. And Perry threw more passes than Malik Rozier, who garnished most of the blame because of his terrible play. But as you mentioned, Perry didn't play much better at 50% completion percentage when he was in there. The hope I've got for Miami is that they've got 3 quarterbacks in camp vying for a position in which they are all 4 to 5 stars coming out of high school. And I got to think that 1 out of the 3, if not 2 of them, can play. And I mean play at a high level. And if they just get decent quarterback play, they should tack on a few more wins with that defense. And I know that they lose a couple of playmakers up front that were monsters in Joe Jackson and Gerald Willis, who are NFL players right now in camp and going to play in the NFL. So the defense is going to take a step back, but I got to think that the offensive passing game is going to be so much better regardless of who wins that job. More intrigue in the rest of the division because you got UNC holding down the bottom, but Mac Brown, of course, breathes life into the program. Georgia Tech with a new coach, and of course, Duke and David Cutcliffe have been mainstays in regards to reaching a bowl game and being a solid program for a number of years now.
Yeah, so a few more comments on Miami because I think that's probably the most interesting pick in the entire conference, really. So, yes, to your point, their passing defense ranked 113th nationally, so just completely atrocious. N'Kosi Perry had 13 touchdowns, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, not the best ratio. And their defense was 18th nationally, which is pretty good, but when you consider just how bad that offense is and how much that throws off the defense. So, yeah, they were totally out of whack. And I think, yeah, I'm sure the quarterbacks will improve, but even if they improve a lot, that still could be pretty bad. And so that's my hesitation with them, and you can feel free to disagree.
So
But
I got a stat for you, Ryan. Miami had one of the 10 worst field position differentials in the country, which points to offensive ineffectiveness and poor punt coverage, and so forth. The worst in the country, Florida State had the worst differential of field position in the country last year. And there's also a stat in regards to the luck of turnovers and there being a luck factor. And Florida State would actually benefit from that more so than any team in the country. They should have been 2.5 plus last year. They were -11. So if you believe in the luck factor in terms of deflected passes and fumbles rolling around and who gets the recovery, Florida State should be better this year.
Yeah, and I think that supports what we were talking about before about Florida State. With all the talent and to your point, the luck factor, Florida State getting a good bit better in year 2. Okay, so the last couple teams I have in the Coastal Division, so 4th in the Coastal, I have Pittsburgh. It's going to be tough for them because they have to replace their star running backs, Darren Hall and Quadri Allison. Allison's now on the Atlanta Falcons. And they were just really heavy in how they leaned on those running backs, and they were awesome. So now Kenny Pickett at quarterback is going to really have to be a bigger part of that offense. He was kind of a game manager last year. Not that he was bad, but he was, they used him as a game manager with those running backs. So their success is going to be heavily dependent on if he takes a step. And he may, but even if he does, being better than Miami and Virginia Tech and Virginia may be a stretch. After that, I have Duke. They returned 9 on defense, but they're replacing Daniel Jones, who went to the Giants for the 6th overall pick. I just think that's going to be tough for them to replace. They were 8-5 last year, and their best wins were Army, Temple, and Miami, and now they replace the number 6 overall draft pick in the most important position. So I think you would expect them to at least not improve much, even if their defense gets better. And then I think the last two to kind of round it out are kind of obvious picks, but UNC and Georgia Tech. I actually am pretty high on what UNC can do long term. I've been really impressed with Mac Brown's recruiting. He took Kyler McMichael's a transfer from Clemson, which is a good ad for him. Shouldn't be eligible this year, but for a long term move, it's smart. Their recruiting classes in the top 15 for the next year. A lot of really good momentum, but it's just too soon. I mean, it's a rebuilding job, so I don't think you can judge them quite yet. Georgia Tech is that, but to a much greater extreme. They didn't even have a tight end. They had to bring in a transfer from UConn because they didn't have tight ends in that offense. That just kind of goes to show just how much of a change it's going to be. Their offensive line doesn't know how to pass. Well, one might say their offensive line doesn't know how to pass block. We'll see. But they didn't do it hardly at all. They recruited quarterbacks to run. So big transition for them. I haven't seen them make quite the splash in recruiting that UNC has. So a little bit higher on UNC, both for this year and the coming years, as Georgia Tech. But I think right now it's pretty fair pick to put UNC 6th, and Georgia Tech is pretty clearly 7th.
I saw a comment the other day from Bronco Mendenhall that he only had 27 ACC caliber players when he took over at Virginia. And I think so he just had to overhaul concepts, but they weren't playing a completely different brand of football. You point to Jeff Collins and to the narrative that you're outlining. you can't even judge his coaching ability to a certain extent this first year, because he's probably going to be record be damned. We're just, we're going to change the whole system and the whole culture and everything and the way we play football offensively. And I'm going to have to slam this, square peg in the round hole and just make it work. And whatever games we win is just going to be icing on the cake, because I'm building for the long term and overhauling the whole roster in the form that I wanted to be, an updated offense. And they're probably just going to suffer some brutal losses, you would think. And the S&P Plus kind of points to that in terms of their project for a team that was 5-3 in the ACC. They're projected to be awful this year.
Yeah, the S&P Plus only favors them against the Citadel, but they do project them for almost 4 wins. Athlon picks them to win 4 games. And I think, there's not the amount of dedicated, hardcore Georgia Tech fans as some of the other fan bases. But living in Atlanta, I've certainly met some, and I think they have pretty reasonable expectations. The program's fun again. They're really branding themselves as kind of the Atlanta era, as they're calling it, the 404, which is the area code here. And so they're having fun with it, and they know it's going to take a little while, but they're changing the offense. In the spring game, they kind of joked and went under center and then backed up to shotgun, and everyone cheered. So I think they have appropriate expectations, and it may take a while, but they seem to be moving in the right direction. I think Paul Johnson did a good job there, played his course out appropriately, and they seem to be moving on with a good hire here.
And then Duke and David Cutcliffe, what a job he's done there. If you look at the first half of his career, basically, it took him a long time to get that thing going. Of course, the breakthrough was the conference championship game appearance against Florida State in 2013, some decent bowl appearances. And now they're a bowl team. I think they've only missed one bowl in like 7 years. They get to bowls. They've won a couple now. And I think that they probably plateaued and reached their general ceiling, and probably they're one of those programs that looks for a breakthrough to cycle through, that they catch a decent schedule every so often and everybody else is down, and maybe they can win another division championship.
Yeah, that decent schedule is not this year. They play Alabama in Atlanta, and then late in the year play Notre Dame, which is quite the schedule for Duke. But
although those don't count toward the ACC, of course.
No, but towards bowl eligibility, they certainly will.
Absolutely. Who have we missed? Anybody?
I don't think so.
There we go. The ACC Coastal Division. It's an interesting pecking order, according to Ryan here, with Virginia winning, which we've seen out of the ACC media and a number of prognosticators across the country. But Virginia Tech sliding in to the 2 spot, in Miami number 3. And of course, Clemson, the overwhelming favorite. I can't think of a time in college football since I've been watching and covering it that there's been a more overwhelming selection to win a division and a conference than what we see with Clemson right now. And I see you trying to think back, but I just can't remember.
Yeah, I think you got to look at some of the dominant Oklahoma years, and then you go back to Pete Carroll and Southern Cal, and that's about it, because the SEC was too strong even when Florida was crushing it or when LSU was crushing it.
Yeah, Ohio State in the Big Ten has obviously dominated that conference, and one of the interesting numbers there is that Ohio State's worst Big Ten season since 2004 is 7-1, except for the interim coach year. So they've dominated the Big Ten, but this Clemson team and the lack of quality in the rest of the conference speaks to just something that would be a story of the decade in college football if Clemson did not emerge with a conference championship.
Yep, it would. The ACC was probably the best conference in 2016. It goes in cycles, and the ACC is very down right now. But you know what? If you're a Clemson fan, I don't think you care. As long as you're still getting in the playoff, what's the difference?
Miami, Florida State. Those are the 2 keys for the ACC to become that SEC Big Ten caliber once again, as they were, as Ryan mentioned, just a few years ago. Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland helping us break down the ACC. Let us know what you think about his predictions down in the comments section below. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That cool. Should do well.